Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Winter 2020 quarterly wrap-up. I make these videos once every 3 months where I talk about the writing goals I had set for myself and what I was able to accomplish, and then I lay out new goals for the next quarter. I actually have a tried and true method of partitioning these videos off into sections, so here we go. Starting with my quarterly overview, here's where I can talk about some of the fun, educational, in the writing world things that I got up to in the last 3 months. My big event of this quarter would have been the MWA annual conference, which would have taken place last weekend, but of course with the coronavirus it impacts a lot of what I'll be talking about in this video, and the conference was canceled. But instead, one of the members of MWA decided to host a free impromptu webinar, which was a lot of fun in its way. It was about how to be productive in writing and life in these quarantined times. I also made it to the 2 scheduled Montgomery County chapter meetings in the last quarter. That's my chapter. The first one was about querying and book proposals and getting published. I picked up a website or two of searching options that I may use, but I'm in a kind of a weird space with my ready to submit project. I'm writing something non-traditional. It's a novella, a literary novella. And so I'm appealing to small presses, and they sort of embody a space in between self-publishing and what's thought of as the most traditional publishing, which in fiction is publishing novels. But sometimes it's nice to remember that writing isn't only about publishing. One of my novella's beta readers complained, in fact, that people, show up in droves to the events about publishing, but not about the rest of writing. Maybe more interested in the prize than the process, But luckily for her, we covered some writing stuff in the February meeting. We had a local writer, Ariel Sealing, I believe. She gave her interpretation of voice in writing. And I think it's the most comprehensive or approachable definition I've ever had about this subject, which is, her quote is, the sum of all the writing choices you make. She, still makes allotments for the fact that a lot of this could be unconscious and that you have to put in a lot of work to even try to figure out your voice, and you have to, of course, do a lot of writing to be able to maintain a voice over time. We did a couple of exercises ourselves to try and figure out the components of our own voice, and also figure them out in quotes by, well-known authors. I found it challenging but fun. Anywho, I will link to her information down below because kudos to her! She won my favorite MWA Presenter of the Quarter award. It's a big deal. I talked last week about joining a new writing group, the Wednesday Writers Group, where we meet weekly, usually at a Panera in DuPont, and for most of the quarter I was able to keep that up. Of course, that's stopped now due to the coronavirus, but I hope once we're able to get out and about again, I'll go back to doing that soon. In the meantime, perhaps I should be smart and open up some communications online with these folks just to stay in the loop. My critique group, alas, only had 1 meeting this quarter. We always have difficulty getting back into the swing of things after the new year, and that's without a pandemic ravaging the globe. But lucky for me, during our 1 meeting, we workshopped 2 of my chapters, chapters 2 and 3 of my fantasy project. And it turned out to be incredibly useful for me. Back when I wrote the 2nd chapter during NaNoWriMo, I called the experience a backing slowly out of a hostage situation. And my group made me understand why. I was dumping in a lot of world-building elements into that chapter, but I wasn't really linking it to the direct experiences of any of the characters. Especially my main character. Contrast that with chapter 3, which was a family drama scene around a dinner table, which, speaking of voice, or writer quirks at least, I'm really starting to realize is one of my biggest strengths in writing prose. And beyond that, these sorts of scenes that are very character-centric are the most meaningful, because I'm definitely of the camp that believes that connecting with characters is the most important part of storytelling. Now I just need to use chapter 3 as inspiration for my rewrite of Chapter 2. So I feel pretty good about things because I identified, thanks to my group helping me, identified strengths and weaknesses and realized that I can use my strengths to help and get rid of some of those weaknesses. Well, before I talk about my fiction goals, here's my quarterly standout about the other writing that I do, namely my blogging. In this section, I pick my top 3 posts written this winter on my 3 personal blogs. Jewish DC is a blog where I talk about local Jewish-themed events happening in the DC area. And back in February, when we could leave the house, I went to a talk at Politics and Prose, one of our big indie bookstores. Ilan Stavins just wrote a book about Yiddish language in America and basically how Yiddish is an ever-evolving language and how it particularly touched upon and influenced America and vice versa. We also got a sneak peek into what he'll be writing next. He's a really prolific and educated guy on his own. It was a really fascinating talk. Really glad I got to go. And then Hava's Footstep is my blog, which I first started out to talk about cultural things from a Jewish perspective and especially an interfaith perspective, but then I went ahead and I broadened my scope. I also talk about my feelings on pop culture, especially when they intersect with Judaism. And in fact, one of the big things that I did this quarter is I went ahead and I revamped my blog style a bit because I hadn't really done anything with it since I first started the blog, and its mission has basically changed a lot, and the things I write about have changed a lot, so I wanted to make sure that the blog represented what I was doing, you know, the links and so forth, so I'm excited about that. But anyway, in terms of what I actually wrote, back in January, I wrote 2 movie reviews, buzzy movie reviews about Star Wars and Little Women, so that was a bit of fun. And I did put a little bit of a caveat about the Hunger Games sequel at the end, because around that time there was a preview chapter that was released and got a lot of buzzy reviews, and I don't know, sometimes I wish Hunger Games wasn't as popular because I think people miss the mark so much with this franchise, and in fact I think they sort of become the Caesar Flickerman of it all, you know, the way that they analyze things. I don't know, it just there's a shallowness when analyzing or refusing to analyze the text in front of you in this case, and I think this is the battle I'll be fighting even more when the book actually comes out, this new prequel book, but I got a little bit of a taste of it back in January. And finally, I have my reading and my writing blog where I talk about reading and writing exploits. I feel like the one I should highlight here is that I did a comparative lit post about 2 modern-day retellings of the Noah's Ark story from the perspective of his wife. It's a perspective that yields a lot of fruit, really, because there's very little in the traditional source material about Noah's wife, and in the last several years there have been at least two significant stories told about this, and both are more or less from a Jewish perspective. Naamah by Sarah Blake is the most well-known, and she has some cultural Jewish heritage, and also used Ethiopian Judaism to inspire some of her story. And then there's Sinners in the Sea by Rebecca Cantor, who she has a much more traditional Jewish upbringing, and so she used a lot of that in her retelling. And so I had a lot of fun comparing and contrasting what these 2 authors did, and I got a little bit more feedback, I think, than usual about it, so I feel like I did a pretty good job. And some of that feedback even came from Rebecca Cantor, which, you know, obviously she's happy to see her work get propped up a little bit, but I was still happy to, you know, catch her attention, especially since Sinners in the Sea has been out for a while, so it was a happy occasion for me. Okay, on to the meat of the piece. We have my Winter 2020 Goals Recap, where I go over the 3 goals I set for myself and see if Septo Unella has to come and chastise me afterwards. Number 1 is Shiz Gets Real, the Corners revision, the final chapters, and that's done! Thanks in part to Kate Kavanaugh's 24-hour write-a-thon last weekend, so it did take a bit longer than expected. But now it's done, and I may have even set the corners off on submission. Eep. This is a big step for me. You know, the corners is my baby, and I've been working on it for over 10 years, even though it's changed a lot in that time. But after all this work, I thought it's finally time to test the waters. But at the same time, I'm too superstitious to say any more than that here right now, so I'm just putting it out there and sharing that I'm taking the leap. Number 2 was to outline and draft Fantasy Project Act 2A for Feb Frenzy, and outline? Yes. Draft? No. Womp womp. With the corners taking longer than I thought, yeah. That's my usual holding pattern, really, where I don't stick to the schedule that I planned. I'm glad I got part of it done, but yeah, you could have done better, self. And finally, number 3 was to keep submitting chapters to the critique group and keep editing them afterwards. This is another one of my half-completed goals, I guess. I definitely submitted to one of our critique group meetings, our only critique group meeting last quarter, but I still haven't edited chapters 2 and 3 yet, though I have edited chapter 1. Yay! I'm already making plans to address this next quarter, but this section isn't about next quarter. So in that vein...
Shame. Shame. Shame.
You had to know that lady would come out during a pandemic. Nothing stops the shame. But as always, moving on to brighter and better things, hopefully, we have my Spring 2020 quarterly goals announcement. This is where I can set new goals for myself and hopefully redeem myself a little bit. So this is what I hope to accomplish next quarter. Number 1 is to compile publishing and contest opportunities for the corners. Eep! I guess I'm just figuring I want to keep that momentum going. If I think it's good enough to submit one place, I could see about submitting it to other places. And especially with a novella, there's literary novella, there's so few opportunities out there that you always want to see what's coming up through the ranks. Then number 2, to complement my last quarter's number 2, is to draft my Fantasy Project 2A for Camp NaNoWriMo. So I already have the outlining work done, I have all the chapters lined up and what I think should happen in each of them. And what do you know, next month is Camp NaNoWriMo, when a bunch of people are getting together to do NaNoWriMo-ish goals, including some people on BookTube, it seems. I just watched a video recently by Steve Donahue, and he wants to organize a group for our corner of BookTube author tubers, and I think I've been invited to join. So that should hopefully help me keep my head in the game. And finally, my goal number 3, venturing into new territory here, is to try my hand at flash fiction for reasons. Namely, there's a local press, the Washington Writers Publishing House, that is putting out their first anthology in like 25 years. So usually this particular press has contests for fiction and poetry, for manuscript length fiction and poetry, and they have 2 winners that are published per year. But you know, an anthology is where a lot of people can get published in one book, and the theme is about American life, I believe. And they're particularly looking for shorter stuff like flash fiction, so I thought maybe I should try and see if I can give this flash fiction a try. This has been a press I've admired for a while. I've gone to a couple of their readings. At last year's Gaithersburg Book Festival, I got one of their books signed by the author. And of course, another perk is that they are looking for writers who have a connection to the DC area. So, you know, that narrows the playing field a little, which for those of you in the writing world, you know how cutthroat things can get and how few submissions are ever accepted for literary journals or other sorts of publication. So it's always nice when you have a little something in your corner. And it's also nice, especially for those of us in the literary fiction vein or who perhaps have less conventional credentials, to get a little special boost and kudos from our local writing communities. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to the blog posts I mentioned and other things in this video that I mentioned down below. I think it's easy to say something glib like, well, we're all stuck inside, so we should all be getting a whole lot of writing done, but that doesn't really seem to be the case, especially in circumstances like this, you know. This is a pandemic raging outside, you know. We don't know exactly who might have it, or if we'll get it, or how badly it might affect us. Mostly we just know that there's no vaccine. So I can understand, as I've been hearing through the BookTube community, that people are a bit distracted instead of invigorated by their time alone at home. I guess that's why presentations like the one I recently had a webinar about with setting up good habits is a good thing to be thinking about. So I hope that the writing community, along with the reading community, is continuing to reach out to one another and remember that none of us are alone and we're all in this together, and to be good to ourselves in these trying times. Also, hopefully at the end of next quarter, we'll be looking back on this experience rather than looking forward into it. Just gotta take things one day at a time for now. I suppose that's enough off-the-cuff motivational speaking for me. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. Keep writing, and I'll see you next time.